What up, everybody? YouTube Live. Mm. Ah, welcome, welcome. Right now is Saturday morning, June 22nd, 2019. And I just watched yesterday's new episode of Swamp Thing. I couldn't watch it yesterday because I was swamped, no pun intended, in a bunch of stuff, including Dances with Films Festival. So I finally got to watch it today, early this morning, to give you um, a Rise and Shine review of it. And this is season one, episode four, titled Darkness on the Edge of Town. As always, like with all my, or most of my TV recaps and reviews, this too contains spoilers. This video is mainly for those of you, my fellow Swamp Thing fans, who have also watched this latest new episode. So heads up, spoiler alert, spoiler alert. Um, Before we get to breaking down the episode or unpacking it, I just want to say that I am feeling very down or feeling very sad at the fact that we're not going to be able to see actress Crystal Reed as Abby Arcane anymore for another. I mean, we won't get to see another season of Crystal Reed because, as you know, DC Universe canceled Swamp Thing. Damn you, DC Universe! I just find Crystal Reed to be very, very gorgeous and magnetic, and I liked her also on Gotham show when she was on it. So, freaking DC Universe, why you gotta break my heart like that, man? Why you gotta go break my heart like that? Hashtag save Swamp Thing. Okay, last week we found out that or Abby Arcane found out that that Swamp Thing is Alec, and last week we got to see him speak. And this episode, he's a chatterbox. He says quite a lot in this episode. So what happens here? Um, this is one of those episodes that I feel because if you've been following this season so far, you know that there's something messed up with the swamp because it's polluted, and it has to do with the accelerant thing that Sunderland and Woodrow, Kevin Durant's character, are messing with or messing about. So um, that caused the quote unquote green fever, right, on the townsfolk. And this episode not necessarily has to do with that pollution, but it does have. I guess you could call this episode sort of like not a filler, but the closest the show will get to being procedural, because what happens in this episode is the fever's already went away, and the next thing that happens is this I guess you could say virus, if you will, not necessarily virus, but it's like the Swamp Thing calls it darkness, and this darkness jumps from one person to the next by way of scratching, and then the episode ends. It doesn't continue. The darkness doesn't continue or spills over to the. It doesn't spill over to the next episode. It ends right here in this episode. That's why that's why I said that this is probably the closest out of this whole season that the show ever gets to being procedural. Procedural means just like any other NBC, CBS, like law, crime, drama network kind of shows, like CSI, for example. Uh, the story begins and ends in each episode. You know what I'm saying? It's not a long story arc. So this thing that jumps from one host to the next, it starts out with this kid named Todd, and I actually interviewed Todd recently. Well, the guy who plays Todd, the actor's name is, I believe, Andrew Yackel. There you go. I interviewed him a couple of days ago on the green carpet of Dances with Films Festival, and I asked him on the carpet, "Hey, this Friday your episode will air," and he's like, "Yeah, And this is his one time appearance. That's gonna be like because his character dies. Okay, spoiler alert. So this is his only appearance on Swamp Thing, and he's like, "Yeah, I'm excited." He said, "Yeah, it was great shooting with shooting the episode with the guys, and everybody on set was cool." He said something along those lines. You can watch my video interview with him on Rama Screen Channel. Um, and I asked him also. I pressed further. I was like, "Okay, so what's gonna happen in this episode?" And that's when he said, I don't know if I'm allowed to say it." uh, I forget what's dotted on the lines on the non-disclosure agreement that I signed. He said, he was very kind about it, but you could tell that he's reluctant to share anything because it'll be breaking his NDA. So I totally understand. But he said, it's gonna be fun. It's gonna be scary. And guess what? It is kind of scary. Now, I know a lot of you out there have concern, if you will, or maybe this is the thing that turns you off the fact that Swamp Thing, this new series, Swamp Thing, unlike the previous iterations, this one really, really emphasizes on its horror nature. It's a Southern Gothic horror, like really just like watching horror movies sort of thing, a lot of jump scares too. A lot of you out there have said that you don't like that format for Swamp Thing. You'd rather have it just straight, I don't know, revenge, where Swamp Thing kind of battles Anton Arcane or whatever, right? Um, but I disagree. I respectfully disagree. I like that they went with the direction of horror, or they crank it up, the horror part. I like that. Case in point, in today's episode or this new episode, um, it's nicely done in my book. Um, and what happens is when the thing infects the host or the person, that person goes into hallucination nightmare mode where they're not asleep, they're not unconscious, they're still awake and walking about, but they're seeing things that are not there. In the case of one of the persons or people that got scratched was Lucilla, played by Jennifer Beals, the cop. I love Jennifer Beals, by the way. She's so hot. And she, you know, she gets this vision um, that her son, Matt Cable, uh, gets shot by a guy in a party that Sunderland has put on for the townsfolk to celebrate the fact that the fever goes away. Um, so that's one example. The other example is with regards to what is her name? I can't. I'm still trying to remember the name of everybody here. Liz. Liz is Abby's friend, and Liz's dad, I believe, it's like granddad or dad. Maybe it's dad. Well, he also starts seeing things like, and it's an actual memory from his childhood when his mom got killed by intruders. Um, so what is fascinating about this fear hallucination thing that everybody is having in this episode, it reminds you of what? It reminds you of Scarecrow. Remember Scarecrow? Batman's nemesis, where he would gask you and then you start like being incredibly frightened of whatever it is that you're seeing at that moment, even though they're not really there. It's totally Scarecrow, man. So, but in this case, of course, it's not the cause of somebody or an entity like Scarecrow. It's just this thing that's from this corpse that finds its way from one host to the next, and by the end of it, Swamp Thing brings the because by this point Abby Arcane also gets scratched, and she starts seeing Nightmare from her childhood as well. But Swamp Thing takes the darkness from Abby and then transfers it back to the corpse, and then the swamp kind of buries the corpse down underneath 6 feet under. Um, I like it. I like it. It's awesome. Whenever I think I've mentioned to you before 1,000 times that my favorite type of story or show or movie when it comes to horror, supernatural horror. Um, and I think Ash versus Evil Dead also does this. My favorite type of story is the ones that deal with hallucinations, things that are not there, or insane asylum. You know, just like that episode in Titans when they find themselves in the asylum to break Raven's mom out to freedom, and some of them gets caught inside and they get kind of experimented over for a few moments, and they start seeing things like Robin starts seeing things and whatnot. I like that. That's my favorite kind of episode. My favorite kind of episode. So today's episode or this new episode of Swamp Thing caters to that, you know, to that appeal, to that part that I like about any show or story. And I'm a big fan of horror in general, anyway. So I always welcome a well told and well staged horror, and I think this episode does that. There's a bunch of horror movies out there or horror shows that are just not, or they are poorly done. They're just not well thought out. Um, this one I think is pretty cool. It appeals to us it appeals to us fans of Scarecrow. It appeals to us fans of horror genre. It's really cool. All right, and back to what I said earlier, Swamp Thing speaks a lot in this episode, and he knows shit because he says that the plants and the vines and everything in that swamp tells him things, and I'm glad that there's a bit of more moments here between Abby and Swamp Thing. I was disappointed how last week's episode it was like, okay, right after he said it's not fighting, it's fighting back. Remember that line? Um Basically he gives her the hint, hey, this is how you cure this fever for the townsfolk. It's fine to cut from that to back to the hospital where Abby uh, heals everybody using that advice. It's fine, but it can't be just that. It has to be like you just find out that Swamp Thing is Alec Holland. You just found out that he can speak, for crying out loud. You're not gonna go back and like have a longer discussion. I was like, what happened? What happened that night? I don't think even this in this episode. I don't think even in this episode, Alec shares with her what happened that night. About him getting shot at, or like, maybe Abby would ask him like, "What did you see? I mean, I know it's dark, but who did you see? Who's the person that shot you? Like, can you make him out somehow?" I would ask him those questions. So I'm glad that today's episode, this new episode, kind of shows more of them having conversation sort of deal, even though it's not enough, but it's definitely more than what we get last week or what we received last week. So I guess it's an improvement, little improvement, but I'll take it. Um, of all the fears, phobias, or hallucinations that we see in today's episode, I know the one regarding Liz's dad, the one regarding Lucilla. Um, that's fine and all. But I think uh, it's for Lucilla. It shows the fear that all mothers have about their child. So it's not really like nothing too revelatory there. There's nothing revealing. Nothing. There's no telling there. All right. When it comes to Liz's dad, Okay, that's his history. All right, but he's not. Liz's dad is a recurring character, so he's not a series regular. So I doubt that it's gonna affect the overall story arc. But the nightmare or the vision that Abby Arcane has when she is under that infection or the darkness takes her as the host, that vision about her childhood, I think that's going to come up again. It's going to get brought up again in subsequent episodes, again because she's a series regular. She's one of the lead actors in the show, and her character is the lead character. um, and the way she tells Swamp Thing, because Swamp Thing asks her, like, what did you see when you were under that darkness thing? What did you see? And she tells him very vaguely, not detailed, right? She tells him, "Oh, it's this thing from my childhood that I thought wasn't gonna catch up to me again." So I think layers of that will get peeled more and more as we go through the next episodes or so. Because I'm curious, I want to know who's that guy that's like holding her up by the neck. I mean, who's that Babadook? I'm curious, and I'm also surprised actually that her nightmare does not involve Shauna. Remember Shauna, her teenage friend that I guess committed suicide or some sort, and that's the daughter of Avery and Maria Sunderland. Because Miss Sunderland still blames Abby for Shauna's death. So I was surprised that in this episode, when Abby's under that influence of the darkness, that it wasn't Shauna that she's seeing. Instead, she's seeing this other thing that I'm like, who's this guy? So and she's not revealing all of it to Swamp Thing. And I think that's gonna get brought up again, and I'll be curious to see what that deal is. And so the last thing before I conclude this review is, of course, the whole thing with Sunderland's and Susie taking in Susie as their child, adoptive child. That's fine and all. I don't really have much opinion about that. But the other thing that's really also prominent, not as prominent as the whole fear, phobia, hallucination thing, but the other part of the story is, or the one involves Ian Ziering's character, um, Dan Cassidy. And Dan Cassidy, as you know, uh, in the comic books, his alter ego is Blue Devil. Blue Devil. So I don't know if Ian Ziering's Dan Cassidy will get to be Blue Devil in this season, but if he doesn't, it's a shame, because if the producers planned it for him to turn into Blue Devil in second season, as you know, we're not getting second season. So it's gonna be just season one full of Dan Cassidy only, not Dan Cassidy turning into Blue Devil. Unless I'm wrong, unless he turns into the Blue Devil this season. But in this episode, he tries to press Madame Xanadu for some more information. Like, is this who I'm supposed to help? Abby Arcane, really? Um, and so it's a very small part of the episode, but it goes to show that I think I think it's teasing us. The writers of the show is just teasing us little by little about Dan Cassidy. They don't want to give too much of it away. Like, okay, and I don't think they want to dedicate an episode just about him or Blue Devil anyway. Um, at least my theory. It's just gonna be like, just like him. We're in that position too. We're wondering, like, okay, what's the connection here? How is it that Dan Cassidy can help or is going to help Abby? And more than that, how is Dan Cassidy going to react when he finds out about Swamp Thing? So it's interesting, especially I interviewed Ian Ziering once last year for Sharknado movie, the final one. Um, I forgot to ask him about Swamp Thing, but it's I guess I don't know if he already joined the cast by then, but it's to me it's an interesting casting choice, Ian Ziering in this role. But at the same time, it kind of also makes sense because as you can see in this episode, it they also design his character to be some kind of a comic relief, um, where he would, like the part where he talks to the balloons, like, oh, why am I talking to the balloons? So I think Ian Ziering's Dan Cassidy here, he means well, but for now, for early on in the game, early on in the season, the writers also make him out to be the comic relief, the guy that tries to get some chuckle out of you every now and then. Maybe as we go more and more into the season, that he would be more and more serious and in his mission to help Abby Arcane. But we'll see. Right now, he's just like, oh, this guy trying to find his purpose in this town. And Madame Xanadu warns Daniel Cassidy something big is on its way, something big that might threaten this town. So I like that. That's cool. That means we're gonna face. I know in this episode we have this thing, the darkness that goes from one host to the next. That's fine and all. It was scary for this one episode, but we need a big bad threat. You know, um, uh, the one that's gonna be like a formidable foe for Swamp Thing to face up or go up against. So when I hear Mrs. Z says that, it's like yes, yes, bring it on, bring it on. I want to see this happen definitely. So another fantastic episode in my opinion. It really speaks to the horror fan in me. I like that they go with this direction with this genre for Swamp Thing. I'm really really sad that we can't get another season. But yeah, we're enjoying these 10 episodes while they last. Right now it's fourth. Next week is fifth episode. So stay tuned for my next week's review of Swamp Thing. Thank you so much for tuning in to this one. Subscribe to my channel, press that like button, ring that bell, and if you can help support this channel, please do so at patreon.com/ramascreen. That's patreon.com/ramascreen. Let's rock this.